You're listening to
Killer Communications.
brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, DNA ID, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Campus Killings,
and
Below the Surface.
all of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
In the middle of his first date with a computer programmer named Cari Farver, Omaha car mechanic Dave Krupa's phone began ringing incessantly. He tried to silence it, but the caller redialed over 20 times, and Dave had to finally excuse himself to answer it. On the other end, Dave's ex-girlfriend Liz demanded he come home. She had stuff in his apartment, and she wanted it right at that moment. But he wasn't on a date, he told her, and she could come another night. But when Dave and Cari were back at his apartment at around 9:30 p.m., Liz called again. She was outside, and she wanted her stuff. Cari could sense it would be better if she left, though she told Dave she'd had a great time, and he should call her when he sorted out things with his ex. As he escorted Cari to the door, Liz stood there blocking the entrance. She and Cari stared at each other before Liz pushed past her, descending on Dave, her face red and eyes full of tears. She gathered her things, and Dave ushered her quickly out the door so he could call Cari and resume his date. He hoped it would be the last time he'd have to deal with Liz, but it was only the beginning. Chapter 1. Plenty of Fish. Dave met Liz on the dating website Plenty of Fish in 2012. He had recently separated from his longtime girlfriend, Amy Flora, whom he shared 2 children with in their hometown of Omaha, Nebraska. The split had been amicable, with Dave moving into his own apartment across the street from Amy and their children so he could still co-parent. And though he was excited to get back into dating, he had realized during his 12-year relationship with Amy that monogamous commitment was not a lifestyle he wanted anymore. He was upfront with the women he met through Plenty of Fish, explaining he was only interested in something casual and fun. He spoke with several women on and off again before truly connecting with a 35-year-old house cleaner named Shanna Elizabeth Collier, who told him to call her Liz. She also had 2 children, and they were around the same age as Dave's kids. They quickly bonded over living through the same phases of parenthood together and became intimate after 5 dates. In the beginning, Liz was fine with Dave's requirement of having a fun, casual fling, but as several months passed, her feelings seemed to change. She began showing up to his apartment unannounced, hoping to see him, and becoming upset when he was out with other women. He reminded her that they'd agreed to keep it casual, encouraging Liz to see other people too. But Liz refused. She wanted him. She deleted her dating profile and wanted commitment. Dave shrugged his shoulders, and as far as he was concerned, Liz could stay or she could go, but he wasn't the committing type. By all accounts, Liz didn't leave, and the two worked out a compromise where Dave promised Liz a weekly date night. But this didn't stop her from showing up unannounced, perhaps hoping that she could convince him to change his mind. If anything, it did the opposite, and a new woman would soon take over Dave's attention. Chapter 2. Meet Cute. In October 2012, as Dave was working at the mechanic shop, he was blown away by a tall, blonde woman who came in requesting assistance with her Ford Explorer. Her name was Cari Farver, a 37-year-old computer programmer who worked in downtown Omaha. She lived across the border in Macedonia, Iowa, and was afraid she wouldn't make it home with the sounds her SUV was making. Dave agreed to take a look, and he later recounted feeling a lightning of shock and chemistry as they accidentally brushed hands while inspecting the car. Cari seemed kind and easygoing, and she was beautiful. He fixed her car, and later that evening, he looked up Cari's name on Plenty of Fish. Much to his delight, she had a profile, and he messaged her. Cari remembered him and was happy to connect. She told him she was a single mom to a teenage son, and she had 2 failed marriages, so she wasn't looking for anything serious, just a good time. Dave couldn't have been more thrilled to meet his match. On October 28th, the two went on their first date where things went off swimmingly. Cari was an excellent conversationalist, and her work and hobbies made her a very interesting person. Dave knew this could be something. At least he thought so until Liz's interruptions started. But Liz's presence didn't deter Cari. She agreed to not only go on a second date, but also a third. And though Dave continued to get emails and voicemails from Liz begging for a committed relationship, he simply ghosted her. Over the next 2 weeks, Dave and Cari chatted constantly and went on several more dates. Dave also arranged for Cari to stay at his apartment for a few days while she was heading up a new programming project at work. He conveniently only lived 10 minutes away from downtown, while Cari's commute from her home in Macedonia was about an hour. It was a fun, short-term arrangement, enough to be exciting, but with the finite knowledge that they'd both go back to their regular routines when Cari's project was finished. So when Dave opened his phone on the morning of November 13th to see a text from Cari asking, "Should we move in together?" Dave had no idea how to respond. They'd both been so emphatic about wanting to stay fun and casual. Not to mention, Cari lived with her teenage son, who was temporarily at his grandparents' while she worked on her project. Dave had no desire to have Cari's child also living in his apartment. He had his own children to care for. He replied, no, that's not what they discussed. But almost immediately, Dave received a volatile text in response. It read, "Fuck you then. I'm seeing somebody else. Don't contact me. I hate you. Go away." Cari also unfriended him on Facebook, and when he arrived back at his apartment that evening, he found all her belongings were gone. Dave didn't know what to think as he looked at the space where her suitcase had been, but at the same time, he was happy Cari had shown her true colors so early on. In his mind, he thought he escaped a crazy person, but if Dave thought things were crazy up to this point, they would get even crazier. Chapter 3. Behavioral Shifts. Only 3 days after Cari's abrupt breakup, Dave's phone began buzzing. Every time he picked it up, it was a vicious text from Cari. Riddled with misspellings, poor grammar, and vulgar insults, he was shocked not only by the barrage, but at how different the tone and language was from the way she'd messaged him while they were dating. But Cari had mentioned at one point that she was bipolar, and he thought maybe she was off her meds. As the week went on, he noticed that Cari's incessant text all seemed to suddenly focus on how much she hated Liz Gollier. Dave found this odd, since the two of them had only brushed past each other on their first date. And at the time, Cari had acted like she found the whole situation with Liz to be humorous. But again, Cari had said she was bipolar, so anything was possible. Dave tried to ignore the text, assuming Cari would get tired of harassing him eventually, and he went on with his life. But a week later, he got a phone call from Liz. According to her, Cari had somehow not only gotten her personal contact information and had been sending hundreds of vitriolic messages, but she'd figured out where Liz and her children lived and vandalized the house. Liz had gone out to her garage the morning before to find that someone had broken in and spray painted the phrase, "Whore from Dave" on the wall. Some old checks she'd been storing in the garage were also missing. They were from a bank account she'd closed some time ago, but it was still unnerving that someone had been through her things. This was no longer just some crazy ex. Cari's behavior had turned criminal. Liz went to the police about her missing checks, and a small investigation was launched, but quickly closed. At the time, no one was aware that one of Liz's checks had surfaced, because it didn't turn up in Omaha. It turned up in Macedonia, Iowa, on the same day that Cari had broken up with Dave. Cari's mother, Nancy, had received a series of strange texts from her daughter. In these messages, Cari said she had quit her job in Omaha and was currently in Kansas interviewing for a new position. She also sent a photo of a check bearing Liz's home address. It was made out to Cari and signed Shanna Gollier for $5,000. Cari's text to her mom indicated that Shanna was buying her furniture so she didn't have to move it to Kansas, and asked if Nancy could be at Cari's house to unlock it for Shanna. In another text to her son, Max, Cari told him to start packing his things because he was moving to Kansas. But neither Cari's mom or son could get her to answer their calls for any clarification. But Max told his grandmother that Cari had mentioned wanting to move to Kansas for a better paying job a few times. He just never thought she'd actually do it because she didn't want to uproot him from his friends and his school. He thought maybe something had happened with her big project and she'd been too busy to tell them. Once again, Cari texted Max, saying she'd come home and explain everything by the weekend. But Cari never came home, and she cited being held up on her new job. She also missed her brother's wedding and her best friend's baby shower the day after, one she was supposed to host. Cari would never have missed such important family events for work, and Nancy knew this was not some new job offer. She thought something had happened to her daughter. She filed a missing persons report on November 16th, 4 days after Cari and Dave's breakup. Chapter 4. Missing or just MIA? When the Macedonia police began investigating Cari's disappearance, they learned about her bipolar diagnosis and that she'd left her medication at home. Based on the fact that Cari was still actively texting her mom and son, along with several posts to her Facebook account, police believe that Cari's behavior was a clear sign that she'd stopped taking her medications and was having a bipolar episode. And since she was an adult, there wasn't anything they could do if she wasn't coming home. But Nancy disagreed. Cari had always been incredibly diligent about taking her medications, not to mention she was a responsible woman who was respectful, caring, and considerate, and she would never simply up and leave her son or refuse his calls. She also pointed out how unlike Cari the text sounded. Cari was a highly educated woman, and when she texted, she used appropriate grammar and punctuation. The texts Nancy and Max had been receiving were riddled with spelling errors, grammatical issues, and very different word choices. But the police said that people who have a bipolar episode often exhibit drastic shifts in personality. As long as Cari was still in contact with her family in some degree, she wasn't considered missing. And though weeks passed and Cari did not come home, she was still very much active when it came to harassing her ex-boyfriend and his old lover. By the end of November, Cari was texting and emailing Dave Krupa and Liz Gollier 60 times a day. And the longer the barrage went on, the scarier the messages became. They would often state details about Dave's current clothing or what he was doing in his apartment. It was almost as if Cari was watching in from outside. Liz received similar messages, putting her in a constant state of fear since she already knew that Cari had gotten her home address. Dave reportedly felt terrible that Liz had somehow become a victim of his ex-girlfriend's strange obsession with him, and as the two bonded over the mental strain of Cari's constant digital attacks, they fell back into a romantic partnership. But if Cari was watching, their rekindled romance did not dissuade their harasser. The messages became even more vitriolic, with texts describing how harm would be done to Liz to get her out of the way. They'd get more texts when they were out on dates together, and often during their dates, their phones would go off simultaneously, each receiving threats, or simply the line, "I'm watching you." Cari's Facebook posts were also very troubling. As in one post from November 26, Cari wrote, "Moving down to Kansas. Now, if I can get my son to move with me, I'd be so happy." Around the same time, Nancy and Max received texts from Cari saying that Max needed to get ready to go. But by this point, Nancy had gone back to Cari's house several times to see if she was coming to get things for her alleged move, and nothing had been touched. Nancy truly believed someone had done harm to Cari, stolen her phone, and was going to come for her grandson too. And as weeks turned to months with only disturbing text and Facebook messages from her daughter's phone, Nancy made the difficult decision to shift legal custody of Max from Cari to herself. By January 2013, Cari was still MIA, and Max missed his mom. She had been gone for over 2 months with barely a word and no phone calls. He reached out on Facebook, though like his grandmother, he was beginning to believe that someone else was behind the keyboard. So he told whoever was on the other side that he would move to Kansas if she could answer 3 questions. What was his middle name? What was the name of their first family dog? And who was his best childhood friend? he never received any communications from his mother again. By this point, the Macedonian police also suspected that Cari was not on the other end of these messages. But where to begin looking for her was almost impossible. But across the border, Omaha police were about to learn about Cari Farver, as Dave contacted authorities on January 13th to say that he'd found his ex-girlfriend's Ford Explorer in a parking lot not far from his apartment. Chapter 5. A Phantom. Dave filed a police report on the harassment he'd been dealing with, along with the fact that Cari was probably stalking him. Liz also reported her harassment and the physical damage to her property, for which police released an arrest warrant for Cari Farver. But when the police forensics team searched Cari's Ford Explorer, there was nothing in the car but one fingerprint taken off a mint container, and it wasn't a match for Cari, or anyone in the CODIS system. Police continued investigating, tracking down potential leads and following IP addresses and digital accounts, but nothing ever led anywhere. Cari may as well have been a ghost for all the evidence she left behind. But this didn't stop Cari from harassing Dave and the woman in his life. Though he had a regular standing date with Liz every Wednesday, he continued to date other women through Plenty of Fish. And somehow, Cari seemed to know. After Dave met a woman named Jessica McCarthy in May 2013, she became Cari's newest target. Dave and Jessica exchanged friend requests on Facebook, and almost immediately after, Jessica received a Facebook message from a C. Lee Farver. The message stated, "You must be Dave's new whore. He's been with me for 5 months. I will run off any woman who tries to be with him. He is sleeping with 3 people I know. And I got rid of one whore." A second message stated, "I will come and kill you and your effing kids. I've killed a dog owned by Dave's last whore he tried to be with." Only 2 hours later, Jessica received the third message. "I see you're still friends with Dave. I will cut your kids' throats and yours while you sleep." Though Jessica blocked C. Lee Farver, messages kept pouring in from several other accounts that all had a variation of Cari Farver's name. Over the course of the next 24 hours, Jessica received dozens of death threats, and the stalker revealed that they knew Jessica's home address and sent her photos of her own child. Terrified that she was being watched and that the stalker was real, she unfriended Dave and the messages abruptly stopped. Jessica went to the police, but they've been trying to unravel the mystery of Cari Farver for over 5 months. So far, she was an untraceable phantom, but for Dave and Liz, she was an escalating phantom. Dave changed his phone number multiple times, but somehow, Cari still figured out how to contact him. One of the most consistent texts he received from her stated, "My favorite thing to do is stand outside your window and stare at you." But the escalation reached a peak when Dave received a photo of a woman who resembled Liz bound with duct tape in the trunk of a car along with the message, "You need to call her right now and tell her you hate her. Otherwise, I'm going to kill her." And unbeknownst to Dave, the worst was yet to come. On August 17, 2013, Liz called Dave in tears to say that her house had burned down, and while she and her children had spent the night somewhere else, her 2 dogs, cat, and her children's pet snake had all been inside and died in the fire. Only a few hours later, Dave received a text from Cari stating, "How did Liz like having her life destroyed while she was with you? That's what will happen to everyone else who comes into your life." But despite this evidence, nothing physical at the scene could point to Cari's location or where she might have gone. For 2 more years, Omaha police tracked down every possible lead to try and arrest Cari Farver. At the same time, investigators in Macedonia were busy looking for someone who was missing and might be a victim, Cari Farver. And though Iowa police received one tip in 2014 that someone with Cari's description had been found at a homeless shelter, the woman was gone by the time they arrived. By the spring of 2015, both Cari's missing persons case and the stalking and harassment case out of Omaha were officially cold. But Macedonia police weren't ready to give up and moved several new officers onto the case to see if fresh eyes could find the missing computer programmer. Chapter 6. A New Investigation. Detectives Ryan Avis and Jim Doty had not been involved in Cari's original missing persons investigation, but they were intrigued at how a woman who had seemed accomplished and devoted to her family had simply run off. They asked to be put on her case, and within the first few weeks, many details emerged that suggested Cari was not alive. The first was that there had been no movement in any of her bank accounts for 3 years, which was abnormal, even if someone was trying to live off the grid. A large cash withdrawal would have at least been present, and there was nothing. The second was no one had heard Cari's voice in 3 years. She was only communicating through text and emails, which was also abnormal. They also became aware of the warrant for Cari's arrest for harassment and stalking, and they decided to partner with Omaha police. The Omaha case file had phone dumps from both Dave's and Liz's phones showing the thousands of vitriolic and threatening communications Cari was allegedly sending. But as Avis and Doty combed through these messages, a pattern emerged in the majority of Cari's attacks, which focused around Liz and her relationship with Dave. This was troubling since Cari had been aware of Liz's presence in the 2 weeks leading up to her disappearance, but none of her correspondence with Dave during those 14 days had any preoccupation with Liz at all. So why such a sudden, drastic shift? Not to mention the extremely different tone and grammatical and spelling usage between Cari's correspondence before November 13th and after. Avis and Doty brought in a digital forensic investigator named Tony Cava, who sifted through the 15,000 emails Dave had received from Cari between 2012 and 2015 in the hopes that he could pinpoint a common IP address. As he worked on this enormous task, Avis and Doty went back through Liz Golyer's phone records and found a mysterious photo of Cari's Ford Explorer in a deleted file. The metadata on the image showed it had been taken in December of 2012, a whole month before Dave reported it to the police. They also found the photo of the duct-taped woman in the car trunk on Liz's phone, the same one Dave had allegedly received from Cari. But before Avis and Doty could find a way to bring Liz in for questioning, she showed up at the Omaha Police Department, looking to file a new harassment report. She was sent immediately to Avis and Doty, where she told them she'd made a mistake in her initial report. She'd originally thought Dave's crazy ex-girlfriend Cari was the culprit, but Liz had since come to a stunning realization. It wasn't Cari, it was the mother of Dave's children, Amy Flora. Liz theorized that it made more sense. They'd been together for over a decade when Cari had only been in Dave's life for 2 weeks, and Liz said she should have realized it was her sooner. Liz went on to explain that she knew Dave had bought a gun to protect himself from their stalker, but he'd recently told her someone had stolen it, and Liz believed Amy was the culprit. She was the only person besides Dave to know that he owned it. While Avis and Doty had already been suspicious of Liz, her report confirmed that she clearly knew something about Cari's disappearance, was trying to distance herself from it. They took the opportunity to ask Liz if she would consent to a download of her phone for the Amy messages, as well as consenting to fingerprinting for larger investigative needs. Liz agreed, unaware that because she was now a suspect in Cari's disappearance, her whole phone would be downloaded, not just the messages pertaining to her report. She also agreed to the prints, which were sent off to the lab for examination against the print found in Cari's Explorer. But while Tony Cava looked over her phone contents and the lab began processing the print, 911 got a call from Liz only 24 hours later. She had been shot in the thigh while walking in a local park, and she told investigators that Amy Flora had done it. But Avis and Doty knew this wasn't true. Not only did Amy have a solid alibi, but all the evidence taken from the park clearly pointed to Liz shooting herself with Dave's gun. Though Liz was clearly a liar, finding out how she was involved in Cari's disappearance was still an enigma, though Iowa's forensic specialist was about to crack the case. Chapter 7. A Trap for an Arrest. Tony Cava spent 3,000 hours of his own personal time poring over all the harassment cases, digital data, and he discovered that every single text and email supposedly sent by Cari all came back to Liz. She had created 30 fake addresses with Cari Farver's name and generated over 20,000 emails posing as Cari. She also used a scheduling app for thousands of texts so they would go out to specific people at specific times. This allowed her to sit next to Dave on their dates and still have them both receive threatening messages from Cari at the same time. Liz clearly knew what happened to Cari, and while detectives suspected she had killed Cari, they needed Liz to lead them to Cari's body. So they went to Dave Krupa and not only announced that his stalker was really Liz Gollier, but that if he had any digital devices that she might have used at his house, would he consent to having them searched? Dave readily gave up an outdated tablet that Liz had put an old SD card from her phone in, and on the SD card, Tony Cava found a deleted photo of a woman's foot in a state of early decomposition. On the top of the foot, the Chinese symbol for mother was tattooed, the same tattoo described in Cari Farver's missing persons report. It was enough physical evidence to prove Liz had killed Cari, but it didn't provide the location of her body. However, they talked to Liz enough to know how to trap her. They called her and told her that Amy Flora was making the harassment investigation very difficult. She wasn't talking, and that meant they couldn't get justice. But they told her if Amy gave a confession, they might be able to prosecute. They knew this would goad Liz into creating some new kind of fake confession to take the focus away from herself. And it paid off, as only days later, Liz forwarded Avis some messages that she claimed were from Amy. In them, Amy stated, "When I met Crazy Cari, she would not stop talking about Dave and him being her husband. She tried to attack me, but I attacked her with a knife. I stabbed her 3 or 4 times in the chest and stomach area, and then took her out and burned her. I stuffed her body in a garbage can with crap. I killed her in her own car." The confession also gave details about breaking into Cari's home afterwards and stealing things from her house. Many of these details exactly matched other evidence from the case, including descriptions of Cari's home and the placement of a private tattoo on Cari's body that had not been released to the public. Only the killer would have known these things. So a search of Liz's residence was conducted, and Cari's camcorder, shower curtain, and 2 receipts linked to her credit card were found in Liz's possession. Cari's blood was also found in her Ford Explorer after forensics investigators removed the seat covers, and the fingerprint from the car was a match to the prints Liz provided. It was more than enough evidence to charge her, and she was arrested on December 16, 2016. Chapter 8. Justice for Cari. While Liz hired one of Omaha's best defense attorneys, she still opted for a bench trial, which began on May 10, 2017. This decision was to force the trial to begin early, which would hopefully keep the police from finding the murder weapon or any other evidence that could implicate Liz. But the prosecution had more than enough evidence, and Avis, Doty, Cava all testified to their findings on the stand. Cava felt so strongly about the forensic evidence that he decided to put off the removal of a brain tumor in order to testify. And their dedication to Cari's case paid off, as the judge found beyond a reasonable doubt that Liz Gollier had not only murdered Cari Farver to get her out of the way, but Liz had impersonated her for over 3 years, to not just Dave, but Cari's own friends and family. In addition, Liz was found guilty of burning her own home to the ground with her pets inside. The judge sentenced Liz Gollier to life in prison for the first-degree murder, along with a consecutive 18 to 20-year sentence for second-degree arson. Today, she's serving her time at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women. Her first parole hearing will be in November 2027. But while Cari's family received justice in the courts, no amount of prison time can resurrect Cari. She's deeply missed by not only her family, but her friends, colleagues, and community also mourn her loss. For Dave, the guilt he feels, even over a decade removed, is still crushing, and he's appeared on several documentaries and true crime specials pertaining to Cari's murder as a way to keep her story alive. Though her murder wasn't his fault, he told Dateline that he plans to cooperate with every TV program Cari's mother chooses to participate in, because, as he said, quote, "I got her daughter killed by dating her." But Nancy doesn't blame Dave, and feels he's just as much a victim of Liz's deceit as Cari was. For her part, Nancy remains in touch with the 3 detectives who never gave up on her daughter's case. Investigators Avis, Doty, and Cava helped establish the Cari Farver Memorial Fund at Cari's alma mater, Iowa Western, in 2019. In addition to keeping Cari's story alive, the fund provides an annual scholarship to a student majoring in computer science as a way to honor Cari's spirit of lifelong learning and her kind and generous nature. Sadly, Cari's body was never found, and although her loved ones would love to bring her home someday, they take some comfort in knowing her killer's behind bars. For our listeners who'd like to take a deeper look into Cari's story, we highly suggest checking out the book, A Tangled Web by Leslie Rule, or the 2020 episode of the same name. Is there a case with an unexplained communication that you'd like us to cover? Please take the time to rate and review the show, and in your comments, let us know what case you'd like us to explore. You can also make your voice heard on social media. We're on every major platform. Just search for Killer Communications on your favorites. You can also contact us through our website, killercommunicationspodcast.com. And if you want to support this show and get access to early, ad-free, and bonus content of not only this show, but to every show on the AbJack network of shows, consider signing up for an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcast. For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock all these benefits, and you can start with a free trial. Simply head over to Apple Podcast and search for AbJack Entertainment to get started. We'll see you back here in 2 weeks with an all-new episode of Killer Communications.
Killer Communications is narrated and produced by Mike Morford for AbJack Entertainment. It's researched and written by Abigail Belcastro. Be sure to visit the show's website, killercommunicationspodcast.com, for past episodes, social media links, show news, and more.